My Chemical Romance's The Black Parade album is commonly seen as an album about a cancer patient who's dying. However, there may be more to their story. Recently, a video by a YouTuber by the name of Windagoon has come to my attention, in which he proposes a very interesting theory about the story in this beloved rock album made by My Chemical Romance. But first, you'll need some background for this album. It was written as a concept album, so essentially that just means the album tells an overarching story or has one particular theme to it. The album is, without a doubt, a classic rock opera, which is to say, rock music and rock chords are used throughout to tell a grandiose story in a very much rock and roll type of way. The reason it's called a rock opera is because it harkens back to the opera plays they would put on for Greeks. It goes so far as to have many of the songs work as ballads for our characters, as though there is a choir or an opera backing up our two characters. One thing you need to note is that just because the album has songs in a set list, that doesn't mean it is the definitive order. According to this theory, the songs are told out of order for a reason I will discuss later. That tells an overarching, grandiose, three-rock arc opera story about a dying cancer patient, as well as someone watching and guiding him through everything. So, let's get started, and what better place to start than the end? According to this theory, the first two tracks, that being The End and Dead, are in fact in chronological order. This is just a straight up call to theater, where not only is the story's plot set up, where we hear the beeping heart rate monitor allowing us to infer that this individual is close to dying, but we also see essential thematic elements set up in how pompous our lead character is talking. Something that needs to be stated to avoid confusion is that there are two main characters who sing throughout the entirety of this album, both of which are sung by Gerard Way. But this album is a story that is told from the perspective of two sides, okay? One is the individual who is in the hospital dying of cancer. He will be referred to as the patient. Here he is, right here. This is the patient. And the other side of the story is told through the perspective of a wayward soul who helps guide the cancer patient to the other side. And he will be referred to as the praetor. This is the praetor. Yeah. Not only that, but the praetor works as almost a backup choir for this cancer patient. I will get into why the praetor isn't necessarily the Grim Reaper later. But for now, I can say that it's like the old folk tales about those people whose souls are forced to guide others to the end. Thankfully, there is a way to tell who sings in what song, and it's pretty simple. If the song starts out acoustically or simple chords, like this, then it is sung from the perspective of the patient. And if it starts out with a classic metallic or parade-esque instrumental, it is one of the songs that the praetor sings, like this. With this theory, whenever the patient has a song, the praetor has a song right after, either criticizing the patient or backing up what they're saying. So the first track sees the patient opening up about life and the fact that he is now facing death. As he's telling his story about what happens, it would seem as though the praetor comes in, cuts him off literally mid-chorus to announce his presence and make this big, inflated, bombastic entrance. This is what I'm talking about when I say songs starting off acoustically versus starting off metallically. In Dead, we have the praetor's introduction, and we see that he's very much crude, crass, and disconnected to the thought of the patient dying from cancer. Which, I mean, if your job was to carry and guide souls through the afterlife, and you've been doing it a long time, it makes logistical sense that you would lose respect for life as we know it. So much so that in the closing moments of this song, the praetor keeps repeating the line, "If life ain't just a joke, then why are we laughing?" And there you have been given an introduction to both characters. One being the patient, whom is dying. and the other being the Predator, who is either going to guide him through it or mock him the entire time. This is all set up for the first act of the story. For those unfamiliar with 3-act story structures, the first act is where you are familiarized with the characters and figure out the trial, and then you go from there. The second act is conflict, usually where the main action takes place or the big character breakup happens. So the third act is the resolution, where everything is brought to a close with a nice ribbon on top. So let's get some more information on the patient, which leads to the third track in this new order, that being Teenagers. Now, admittedly, this song kind of cheats with the whole acoustic against metallic opening thing we set up earlier, but there is, surprisingly, a good reason for that. That being the fact that this song is from the perspective of the patient, but not how he is now. Rather, when he was young, not necessarily the average 14 to 16-year-old stereotypical teen, but most likely around 18 to 19, possibly even 20. And I say this because he speaks about teenagers in a past manner. Teenagers is used to set up the life of the patient, where we can see that the patient is indeed a very hateful and violent individual, and sounds nothing like someone who's dying in a hospital. That, again, being because he isn't dying yet. The Predator then does as he usually does and comes in right after the patient with the next song in order, The Sharpest Lives. This song is essentially the Predator talking about how some people will live life recklessly with no respect for life and how it leads to destruction. It also sort of paints this picture that the Predator believes that the patient deserves what is happening to him, at least because of the hateful attitude the Predator gives off in this song. Now, while the patient may not deserve to be dying from cancer, that doesn't mean he is a patron saint either, as we will see later throughout this album. So, this is the end of Act 1 already, and where we see our patient who is dying from cancer and used to be a giant dick, we see the Predator, who doesn't give a shit, and after hearing how the patient used to be, he gives even less of a shit, honestly. But then we get a major tone shift, which leads into the second act of the story, where the patient realizes what is happening to him, as well as realizes the actions he's had and the consequences of said actions, and that is cancer. Cancer is, without a doubt, the saddest song throughout the entirety of this album, as there's no real edgy anything. It's just a deeply truthful and honest depiction of what someone thinks when they're dying of cancer. While lines like, "the hardest part of this is leaving you," might seem overtly cliche by today's standards and depictions of art and music, when put into the perspective of someone dying way too young from something out of their control, it would make sense for him to feel this way, especially since the hardest part of dealing with cancer is to have to say goodbye to those who you love the most. We are not yet to the point of the patient's acceptance, but at this point, at the beginning of Act 2, which is where we are now, we see the conflict rising. The patient has come from a very hateful, argumentative place, and now he has to face the harsh, dark, true reality of death, something that nobody is truly ever ready for, let alone someone in their early 20s. Like I said, he could even be 18 or 19. We hear him singing in a soft manner, a somber tone, nothing like his earlier songs in The End and Teenagers, when he was loud, pompous, and self-centered. However, what do you think this change in attitude means to someone like the Predator, who has been guiding souls through the afterlife for what we can only assume to be ages at this point? Absolutely nothing, as the next song in this list is House of Wolves. Here, we see exactly how we would expect someone of the Predator's nature to act. He is very mocking towards the patient, and one of the core concepts of this song that the Predator sings about is that of judgment, and when it comes to death, we know what that means. He goes throughout the song talking about living life as a good and a bad person, up to the point where he's even mocking religious overtones and sayings. showing an absolute lack of respect for life, sanctity, and things of the sort, even saying the letters S-I-N repeatedly, implying that due to the patient's life, just because he is now feeling sad won't save him from death and damnation. Now, so far in this story, the patient cannot hear the praetor, and the praetor is more or less acting as the patient's backup. However, on the patient's side, we still have this conflict, and then we see an absolute devastating, soul-crushing turn of events with the 7th track in order, I Don't Love You. It seems like what happens here is that the patient has forced his lover to leave him. He seems upset with himself for what he has to do, but he knows that this is the right thing to do, in the overarching scheme of what things have in store for him. The shift from know that I will never marry in Cancer to when after all the blood that you still owe, another dollar is just another blow. So take your gloves and get out while you still can. In I Don't Love You, feels like he doesn't want her to face the pain that he's going through. He's intentionally hurting her to make her leave. I believe that this can be viewed as sort of a selfless act, and will help lead to something we see very soon. And that brings up this horrible idea. If these people are just kids, no older than 20, what kind of burden was that on his partner to just watch the young patient slowly crumble away as they die from cancer, becoming a husk of their former self? But at the same time, what a burden that is on him in his final moments, driving his lover away so she won't feel as much pain, causing him to be alone in his closing moments. It's absolutely heartbreaking. But again, the patient says something, the praetor has to make a comment, and that comment comes in the form of, "This is how I disappear." In this song, the praetor is seen talking about how the patient is dying alone with no one beside him. But not only that, he seems to mock the patient with how he treated others in life with, "I'm just a ghost, so I can't hurt you anymore." This, more than anything, personifies the whole opera theme I was talking about earlier. Where the patient talks about something, the praetor is standing behind the patient with this grandiose, bombastic, over-the-top orchestra to emphasize what they just said. However, what I think is important about this song, especially in the overall tone of the album, is the last verse. See, up until this point, there has been this influx of charisma and charm from the praetor, as if nothing can touch him. But when the instrumental drops down and it becomes more of a hellish symphony, it's like the praetor is starting to lose it and screams out, showing the first signs of the praetor cracking. He sees someone alone and young, dying, and it starts getting to him. To which you may ask yourself, well, why? Hasn't he seen this plenty of times before? Why would it get to him? And I can answer that, but in a second. And so, we end the 8th track by seeing death starting to break and some cracks shining through with how he feels about the patient. So how does the patient feel? This is where we get into a highly underrated song on this album. If the album is about a kid dying from cancer and recognizing that that's okay, and him making the most of it, then this song is that pivot. Everything before this has him being pompous or sad self-reflection. But this is the direction he turns where he begins to recognize that he's dying and that it is okay to die. And that song is Disenchanted. Not only is this song very sad and serious, but with the theme of this patient, it makes sense. He was a kid, just like so many others, he really didn't really appreciate life, but then he got hit with the blunt force of reality all at once. And then he makes the person whom he loves the most leave him. Now he is completely alone with, as he has said, no one to turn to. And this whole life thing that he's been so big about, ready to go for, seize the world by his hand, is coming to an abrupt end, falling apart around him, and he's just disenchanted with everything going on. While it is sad, especially seeing someone so young have to go through it all in the first place, there seems to be this odd sense of peace that he gets from it all. He says in the beginning,
I hate the ending myself, but it started with an alright scene.
inferring that he's finally accepting the idea that he is dying from cancer. And though he doesn't like that this is how he's going out, he's acceptant of it and ready to pass on. He's now in a time of self-reflection. He recognizes that he can't do anything about it, but that is okay. It's gonna happen anyway, and he'll be here for when it comes. So after one of the most somber songs of this album that also signifies the end of the second act, since that was the end of our conflict, the patient dying and going through this whole journey of acceptance, well, now he knows how to accept this whole ordeal. Well, what's the resolution going to be, since we still have the Praetor losing his shit, especially after the end of How I Disappeared? Well, it seems as though the Praetor opens the third act with his own story, his teenagers, otherwise known as Mama. People who try to take the entire album chronologically and try to make it a big old metaphor for death have shown a continuous struggle with both teenagers and this song, that being Mama. They say, oh, this is him after he has died and he's talking to a character named Mama, and that doesn't really make sense. Whereas this does make sense. If the Praetor is a wayward soul, as we discussed earlier, then at some point in the past he had to become lost. Then, this is his story of how he became a lost soul. This is, in essence, essentially the Praetor's own version of the song Teenagers. At the beginning, we are immediately fed these old sounds of accordions and bombs dropping, which immediately paints the picture of some soldier fighting in the Great War, otherwise known as World War I. He talks about writing letters about how he is soon going to face death, but not only that, there is also alliteration to World War I throughout the song, such as the verse,
My mother was the one into my legs and to my tongue. You should have raised that baby girl. I should have been a better son. If you could count on the infection, they can amputate it once. You should have been. I could have been a better son.
adding on the sonograph with the voices played at the end. It is without a doubt that this song takes place in the Great War. Well, you could ask yourself, if you don't know this story, well, why would it randomly cut to a song in the past? And that's because, like I said earlier, this is the backstory for the Praetor, essentially his own version of teenagers. This is also here to show why the Praetor has empathy and sympathy for the patient. The Praetor was a soldier who fought in World War I, and as we can hear in a lot of verses, he's mad, angry, upset, synonyms! He hates himself, and what happens? We hear air raid sirens taking over the instrumentals. We hear the Praetor calling out for his mommy. For silence falls. We hear his mother speaking, and then we finally hear him rise back up. He's then followed by this orchestra, whom we can only assume to be the thousands of other soldiers who are damned and have fallen before him. All these lost souls singing in unison about being damned together.
And if you would call me your sweetheart, I'd maybe then sing you a song. But the shit that I've done with this, never got you would cry out to rise along. With time after all, through fortune and blame we fall. And if you could stay, then I'll show you the way to return from the ashes you fall. We all carry on when our brothers in arms, our brothers in arms. So raise your glass high for tomorrow. We die and return from the ashes you
And the song slowly closes with soft strings playing as the music slowly fades out. hearing only the Paredo's mother crying at what we can assume to be his funeral, or at least crying at the news of the Paredo's passing. As I said, this song is the Paredo's teenager's song. It's a look into what he used to be like before he became a wayward soul. It shows why exactly the Paredo would feel any form of pity towards the patient, even though he has done this countless other times. We see here that though the patient used to be pompous, hateful, and kind of an asshole, he seems to be dying alone, quite possibly due to the way he treated people. We see here that the Paredo himself has also died alone on the battlefield on the Great War, nothing more than a statistic. This not only justifies the songs earlier where the Paredo was so pompous and was all, "Fuck you, I don't give a shit," not caring about death and seemed to hate everything, but it also justifies his change of heart, which we haven't got to yet, but hold on, we're almost there. The next song in order we have is Sleep. So this song is the beginning of a resolution in Act 3, between the patient and the Paredo. Sleep is essentially the patient coming off of the mood in Disenchanted, and him recognizing that now is the time to die, and that he has done a lot of wrong in his life, and that it is okay that he is dying now, which further backs up the point that he is dying alone because of his actions, and he doesn't believe he deserves to enter heaven. At the end of the song, we hear the patient starting to slip away, dying slowly. However, if you listen really close, behind these instrumentals, you can hear the Paredo in the back of the song, behind the instrumentals, screaming at the patient, begging the patient to wake up and not let go. Now this is a drastic change of pace for the Paredo, seeing as the last time we heard him talking to the patient in How I Disappear, he sounded very angry and very against the patient. He's now seen begging and pleading with the patient to hold on, and wouldn't you believe it, but it seems to work, as the next track in order is the two of them having an argument, and that track is Famous Last Words. This song, Famous Last Words, open with the Paredo's side of the discussion, and now you understand why I chose that one specific image to be the Paredo. Isn't that funny how things work out? It's almost like I wrote, scripted, edited, and recorded this whole thing, bro. Anyways, the chorus of the song is them arguing, and it starts off with the patient making his point. We see this back and forth between the Paredo and the patient, where the patient is saying, "No, it's fine, I'm okay with dying," and the Paredo pleading with the patient to keep pushing through it, explaining why he needs to fight death while the patient explains why it's okay for him to die now. It's also a very sad thing to think about if you think of the Paredo as this young man who was drafted into war, as he died just in a completely senseless way like how the patient is now. It's like the Paredo saying, "No, you need to survive. I died too young and it's happening to you. Please just live your life to the fullest. I need you to live." He's pushing the patient to fight, to keep on living because he himself never could do that. It was just, boom, shot and dead. Also, going back to that original idea of judgment earlier, Famous Last Words appears as the 13th and final track on the original album, and there are two endings to the song, surprisingly enough, which is the album version, which ends with a choir singing, and then there's also the radio/music video version, which ends with heavy metal guitars. This most likely means the choir ending shows that the patient decides to fight on or go to heaven, whereas the metal ending implies the opposite, where the patient definitely dies and goes to hell. I also agree with this, however, where most people see this as the end-all be-all, I view it as the final judgment before the actual death, because we have one song left. And because of the album version, which is originally where the story comes from, we can assume that he has made it. Because of this whole journey, because of how he has bettered himself, because of how he's tried to repent for his wrongdoings, his sins, he makes it to heaven. However, I see it as him going with what the Praetor wants. It's a choir ending, and the Praetor has been this backup choir the entire time, so to me, it makes sense. And so, the patient wakes up in his hospital bed, thinking back on everything he has been through in life, and how he is happy to have made it. And so, where are we? We're 12 tracks in, and the patient has done so much. He's gone from someone who hates everyone and everything. He's gone from a violent person to someone who understands his wrongdoings and has tried to repent for his sins. The Praetor himself, well, he's gone through a journey of self-betterment as well. Having started off laughing at the patient, cutting him off mid-chorus and mocking him through the whole ordeal, by the end, the Praetor was begging the patient to stay alive, just wanting the best for him, recognizing how similar he is to the patient and coming to terms with the patient's resolve. And now it doesn't seem like there's that much to do. Then throw the patient a parade. Welcome to the Black Parade. This is the story of our album, and the final send-off to the patient. And this is beautiful from a story perspective. The reason the patient saw the Praetor as a Praetor and not the soldier he died as, or even some other omen of death, is because, as the patient mentions in the beginning of the song,
When I was a young boy, my father took me into the city.
although it is implied that the patient's father died when the patient was only a young kid, possibly from the same illness, the patient still has always seen his father as some kind of role model or mythical figure that always taught him to do good and, as the song states, carry on. So, in his final moments, he sees death come to him as that being of good and justice that he always imagined it to be, a parade leader marching on. So this is it. This is the final moment in the Praetor's journey, and the patient's journey through cancer. He's finally ready to carry on, and he's finally ready to go. It is finally his moment to go and join the Black Parade. But this time, and this is something a lot of people miss out on, what is it that the Parade is singing? They're singing a song for the patient. For the patient. Instead of it being the Praetor trying to tell his own story and scream over the voice of the patient, this time he's chosen to respect the patient, as if not himself, then an equal. We hear him singing at a nice vocal tone, not screaming, not rock and roll, very nice, very instrumental. In his last moments, the Praetor uses all of his strength, all of his people, his strings, his bass, everything, to sing the patient's song as he's carried either into the afterlife or back into life. Then, as the song ends, we get that end ballad, where the Praetor sings about his mama from the previous song, and tells the patient to carry on, and how he will always have the memories of those who go before us. Then, in the end, as we see in the music video, the Praetor grants respect to the patient as he walks into no man's land, along with the other soldiers. And there it is. That is the true hidden story of the Black Parade. I mentioned earlier that the album is out of order, and there is a reason. That reason is, if the album were in order, it would be very difficult to listen to each song as a one-off, whereas if it's told out of order, then it is far easier to enjoy the music. Instead, however, people love the Black Parade because it's just fucking awesome. Stories are far more powerful when written so that you have to come to the conclusion yourself, and I feel like nothing exemplifies that notion more than the Black Parade. Now, I admit, I've thought about this live album, The Black Parade is Dead, and I believe that it's kind of the same story but without the Praetor, and the setlist is in order this time. I say this due to lyrical changes. Like at the end of Mama, instead of hearing the mother crying, we hear the patient saying, "A surprise party for me, you shouldn't have." I believe that, in that version at least, the patient is in his late 40s. It's a callback to when he was in his early 20s and he fought the war. So that's my explanation as to why the two albums, surprisingly, aren't the same story. This album, The Black Parade, as its own piece, is amazing. Each song is great to listen to on their own. Now, does me making this video kind of ruin the whole figure the story out yourself thing? But I mean, the album's been out for like, what, a decade? So, spoiler alert, you fucking idiots. However, if you're pissing your pants because I failed to bring up blood and kill all your friends, they were removed for a reason. But if it's such a big deal, Blood is the patient when he was still snarky and an asshole, talking about how he doesn't like the nurses, and Kill All Your Friends is the part saying that the patient is gonna die and everyone's gonna throw a party about it. So you can throw those two songs in after The Sharpest Lives and Before Cancer, before that turnaround. I don't consider these songs canon, mostly to either of the two albums, whether that be The Black Parade or The Black Parade is Dead, because they weren't included, but if you want, fucking be a loser or whatever. That's just for the nerds. I want to give a big thank you to everybody who helped me out, which is nobody. So fuck you all. You're all worthless. Only thanks I have is to the people watching, because I've spent the last 8 days writing, recording, editing, which, by the way, I hope I did good. This is my first time editing on a computer, and first time doing Facecam. Also, a huge, grandiose, bombastic thank you to Windigoon for making me see this album in a completely new light. If you guys would like to see me cover pretty much anything else, leave it down in the comments below. While you're down there, also make sure to like and subscribe, because I am the best YouTuber on this platform. That's about it. I'm sorry for the weird monthly uploads, and I'll see you all next time. Stay sexy, you filthy animals.